The stainless steel doors of Operating Room 4 swung open, and the hospital's top surgeon pointed a trembling, blood-stained finger at the quiet scrub nurse. "Get out! You're fired!" He expected her to beg. He didn't expect a 4-star military convoy to lock down his hospital an hour later. To the administration at Chicago's Mercy Presbyterian Hospital, Margaret Sullivan was just a payroll number. To the junior residents, she was Maggie, the quiet, unsmiling scrub nurse who never joined them for post-shift drinks and always wore long-sleeve scrubs, even in the sweltering heat of a Midwest July. But to anyone who actually paid attention inside Operating Room 4, Maggie was the invisible gravity that kept the chaos from spinning out of control. She possessed an eerie, almost unnatural calm. While alarms blared and monitors screamed, Maggie's heart rate never seemed to rise. She moved with a frightening efficiency, handing over retractors and scalpels a fraction of a second before they were requested. Her eyes, a sharp pale blue, missed nothing. But Dr. Oliver Stanton hated her for it. Dr. Stanton was Mercy Presbyterian's golden boy. At 42, he was the chief of trauma surgery, a man whose pedigree was as flawless as his tailored Italian suits. He was a creature of ego and Ivy League privilege, accustomed to absolute deference. In Stanton's world, the OR was his kingdom. The patients were his subjects, and the nurses were merely extensions of his own hands, tools meant to be used, silenced, and occasionally berated when his own nerves frayed. For months, a quiet, toxic war had been brewing between them. Stanton thrived on the theater of surgery. He liked to bark orders, sweat profusely for dramatic effect, and throw instruments when things didn't go his way. Maggie, however, refused to play her part in his play. When he threw a tantrum, she simply stood there, an unmovable statue, wrapped in sterile blue paper, waiting for him to finish. Worse than her silence was her competence. Stanton had begun to notice that Maggie wasn't just anticipating his needs, she was quietly preventing his mistakes. Last Tuesday, when Stanton had nearly severed an anomalous pulmonary artery, a Kelly clamp had miraculously appeared in his line of sight, blocking his scalpel just in time. He hadn't asked for it. She had just placed it there, forcing him to pause. When he looked up, she had only offered a blank stare, completely masking the fact that she had just saved him from a catastrophic career-ending hemorrhage. Instead of gratitude, Stanton felt a burning, irrational resentment. He felt managed. He felt patronized by a woman who made a fraction of his salary and held no medical degree. Sullivan. Stanton snapped one afternoon as they scrubbed out of a routine bowel resection. He aggressively scrubbed the soap from his forearms, glaring at her reflection in the mirror. "You've been hovering lately. I don't need a shadow. I need a scrub nurse." Maggie calmly dried her hands with a sterile towel, her movements deliberate and practiced. "I assist where the flow requires, doctor." "The flow?" Stanton mocked, tossing his towel into the bin with unnecessary force. "You aren't the surgeon here, Margaret. You don't dictate the flow. You hand me the tools. If I want a sponge, you give me a sponge. If I want a moment to think, you stand perfectly still and wait. You are overstepping." "Understood," Maggie said softly. Her voice gave absolutely nothing away. Stanton sneered. "I know your type. You did a few years in some rundown clinic, maybe watched a few too many episodes of ER, and now you think you're a rogue doctor. Keep to your station, Sullivan, or I'll have you transferred to the pediatric ward where you can hand out lollipops." Maggie didn't flinch. She simply disposed of her gown, revealing the edge of a thick, jagged scar that peeked out from the collar of her undershirt, a detail Stanton was too self-absorbed to notice. "Have a good evening, Dr. Stanton," she said, before walking quietly out of the scrub room. She walked with a very slight, almost imperceptible limp in her left leg. It was a phantom ache, a souvenir from a life Stanton couldn't begin to comprehend. Before she was scrubbing in at a sterile Chicago hospital, Maggie Sullivan had spent 6 years attached to a classified Joint Special Operations Command unit in the Korengal Valley. She wasn't just a nurse. She had been a combat surgical specialist, stabilizing shattered soldiers in the back of violently pitching Black Hawk helicopters while taking incoming fire. She had worked with mud sand and blood caked up to her elbows, performing emergency tracheotomies with pocket knives and sealing chest wounds with nothing but sheer will and medical tape. Stanton's sterile, brightly lit operating room was a vacation. His tantrums were nothing compared to the deafening roar of a mortar shell. But Maggie liked the quiet. She wanted the anonymity. She had left the military with severe PTSD night terrors and a chest full of medals she kept buried in a shoebox at the bottom of her closet. She had taken the scrub nurse job because it was simple. She didn't have to make the life or death calls anymore. She just had to pass the instruments. But fate, it seemed, was not done testing Maggie Sullivan. The storm hit on a Friday night in late October. A sheet of freezing rain had turned Interstate 90 into a ribbon of black ice, resulting in a horrific 15-car pileup involving a commuter bus and a logging truck. Mercy Presbyterian's emergency department transformed into a war zone within minutes. The paging system echoed relentlessly through the corridors, calling every available surgeon to the trauma bays. The scent of copper iodine and wet wool filled the air. In OR4, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The patient was a 22-year-old man named Toby. He had been pinned in the passenger seat of a sedan that was crushed under the logging truck. His chest cavity was severely compromised, his ribs shattered, and his blood pressure was plummeting so fast the anesthesiologist was openly sweating. Pressure is 60/40 and dropping. The anesthesiologist barked, his eyes glued to the monitor. "He's bleeding out somewhere. We're losing him, Oliver." Stanton was elbow deep in the young man's open abdomen, frantically searching for the source of the hemorrhage. His forehead was slick with sweat. His hands, usually so precise, were trembling. The sheer volume of dark pooling blood was overwhelming the suction tubes. "More suction!" Stanton yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "I can't see a damn thing, sponge. Give me another lap sponge." Maggie slapped the sponge firmly into his palm. "It's not in the abdomen," she said quietly. Stanton didn't look up. "Shut up, Sullivan. I didn't ask for your opinion. It's the spleen. It has to be." "The spleen is intact," Maggie stated, her eyes locked on the cavity. "The blood is welling from above the diaphragm. It's a descending aortic tear. You need to open his chest." "I am the surgeon," Stanton roared, his voice bouncing off the tiled walls. "His belly is filling with blood. Clamp. Give me a right angle clamp." Maggie held the clamp, but didn't pass it immediately. "Doctor, if you don't crack his chest and cross-clamp the aorta in the next 30 seconds, his brain will be starved of oxygen. He will die on this table." "Give me the damn clamp," Stanton screamed violently, snatching it from her tray, knocking a row of delicate scalpels onto the floor with a metallic clatter. The heart monitor suddenly changed its pitch. The steady rhythmic beep dissolved into a rapid, erratic trill. Ventricular fibrillation. The patient was crashing. "He's coding!" The anesthesiologist shouted, "Starting compressions!" Chaos erupted. The circulating nurses scrambled for the crash cart. Stanton completely froze. He stared at the pool of blood, his mind entirely blanking under the crushing weight of the moment. The golden boy of Mercy Presbyterian had hit a wall he couldn't charm or bully his way through. Time seemed to slow down for Maggie. The sterile hospital walls faded away, replaced by the instinct she had forged in the dust of Afghanistan. The hierarchy of the hospital no longer mattered. The man on the table was dying, and the man in charge had broken. Maggie stepped around the Mayo stand. She didn't ask for permission. She shoved Stanton's shoulder hard enough to break his sterile field and knock him stumbling backward. "Hey!" Stanton gasped, stumbling into a tray table. "What the hell? Scalpel, number 10. Maggie barked at the junior circulating nurse, her voice suddenly ringing out with the raw, absolute authority of a battlefield commander. The nurse, terrified and acting on pure reflex, slapped the blade into Maggie's hand. Without a millimeter of hesitation, Maggie made a massive, swift incision straight down Toby's sternum. "Security!" Stanton shrieked, his face pale with horror. "Call security! She's assaulting a patient!" Maggie ignored him. She grabbed the heavy rib spreaders, cranked the chest cavity open with terrifying strength, and plunged her bare-gloved hands directly into the chest. The blood was hot and blinding. She bypassed the lungs, navigating purely by touch, her fingers sliding over the slippery tissue until she found the pulsating torn vessel just above the diaphragm. "Cross clamp," she ordered. The anesthesiologist, recognizing the sudden shift in competence, bypassed Stanton entirely and slapped the heavy clamp into Maggie's waiting hand. With a quick, brutal twist of her wrist, Maggie secured the clamp over the aorta, instantly cutting off the catastrophic blood flow to the lower body and redirecting whatever was left to the young man's dying brain. "Defibrillator," Maggie commanded. "Charge to 200. "Charged," the anesthesiologist replied, breathless. "Clear." Toby's body jerked on the table. The long, flat tone on the monitor wavered, spiked, and then fell into a weak but steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. The room fell into a deathly stunned silence. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of the machinery and the ragged breathing of the surgical team. Maggie slowly pulled her hands out of the chest cavity, her forearms slick with blood. She looked over at Stanton, who was plastered against the wall, hyperventilating. "The bleeding is isolated," Maggie said, softly, stepping back to her original position as if nothing had happened. "You have about 45 minutes to repair the tear before ischemic damage sets in, doctor. I suggest you scrub back in." Stanton's shock slowly morphed into an apocalyptic, blinding rage. His ego had not just been bruised, it had been publicly brutally eviscerated in front of his entire staff. A nurse, a lowly scrub nurse, had physically pushed him aside, hijacked his surgery, and saved a patient he was about to lose. He didn't scrub back in. He pointed a trembling, blood-stained finger directly at her face. "Get out!" Stanton hissed, spit flying from his lips. "Doctor the patient," the anesthesiologist started. "I said get out!" Stanton roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "You are done, Sullivan. You are fired. You will never work in medicine again. I will have your license shredded. I will have you arrested for assault and battery." Maggie looked at the monitor, ensuring Toby's vitals were holding. Only then did she step back. She stripped off her bloody gloves, tossing them into the biohazard bin. She didn't defend herself. She didn't argue. She knew the rules of the civilian world, She had crossed an unforgivable line, even if it meant saving a life. "Close him up properly, Oliver," she said quietly. "His internal mammary artery is fragile." She pushed through the swinging stainless steel doors, leaving the stunned silence of OR4 behind her. 20 minutes later, Maggie was standing in the desolate basement locker room, shoving her civilian clothes and a few personal items into a duffel bag. She felt a hollow exhaustion settling into her bones. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the familiar creeping shadows of her past. She had tried to blend in, she had tried to be normal, but she couldn't let a boy die just to protect a surgeon's fragile pride. Upstairs, the hospital administration was already in a frenzy. Stanton, having stabilized the patient with the blueprint Maggie had forcefully laid out, had stormed into the chief of staff's office, demanding Maggie be blacklisted across the state. The HR director was furiously drafting a termination letter, citing gross insubordination, physical assault, and medical malpractice. They were so consumed with crucifying Margaret Sullivan that they entirely failed to notice the convoy arriving at the front gates. It started with a low rumbling hum that vibrated through the reinforced glass of the hospital lobby. Outside, the freezing rain was coming down in sheets, but it didn't slow the 4 massive black armor-plated Chevrolet Suburbans that sharply cut off the ambulance drop-off lane. Following them was a pristine black Cadillac limousine bearing heavily tinted windows and government license plates. Hospital security guards rushed toward the doors, fully intending to yell at the drivers to move the unauthorized vehicles. They stopped dead in their tracks when the doors of the Suburbans flew open in perfect synchronized unison. A dozen heavily armed military police officers wearing rain-slicked tactical gear and grim expressions stepped out into the storm. They moved with terrifying speed, immediately securing the perimeter of the entrance, their hands resting cautiously near their sidearms. The hospital lobby, bustling with anxious families and tired nurses, fell completely silent. The automatic sliding doors parted, and the military personnel stepped inside their heavy combat boots, echoing ominously against the polished linoleum. Then the rear door of the Cadillac opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with steel-gray hair cropped close to his scalp. He wore the immaculate, sharply pressed dress, blue uniform of the United States Army. On his shoulders rested 4 silver stars. His chest was heavy with ribbons, but it was the quiet, lethal authority radiating from him that made the hospital staff subconsciously take a step back. General William Mitchell had arrived at Mercy Presbyterian, and he was not there for a routine visit. He walked up to the main reception desk, flanked by 2 towering military aides. The receptionist, a young woman who looked as though she might faint, managed to stammer out a greeting. "Can I help you, sir?" General Mitchell pulled off his leather gloves, his piercing gray eyes scanning the lobby before locking onto the terrified receptionist. "I'm looking for Margaret Sullivan," Mitchell said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded instant obedience. "And I suggest you find her before I have my men tear this building apart." A prestigious surgeon fired a quiet scrub nurse mid-surgery to hide his own deadly mistake. He thought he buried her career forever. But he never expected a heavily armed military convoy to lock down his hospital, led by a 4-star general, looking for the woman who just saved his son. The receptionist's trembling fingers hovered over the paging console, but she didn't have to press a single button. The sudden terrifying commotion in the hospital lobby had already triggered a silent security alarm. Down the polished corridor, the heavy double doors swung violently open, and Dr. Harrison Caldwell, the chief of staff, practically sprinted into the reception area, flanked by 2 breathless security guards. Close behind him was Dr. Oliver Stanton, still wearing his blood-spattered surgical scrubs and a look of supreme exasperation. Stanton had been in the middle of spinning a magnificent heroic tale to Caldwell about how he had single-handedly pulled a young man back from the brink of absolute death. When Stanton saw the grim-faced military police actively securing the sliding glass exits, his annoyance quickly morphed into profound confusion. "What is the meaning of this?" Caldwell demanded, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he marched up to the towering military commander. "This is a private civilian medical facility. You cannot simply barricade our doors, General, or not." General William Mitchell slowly turned his gaze toward Caldwell. His eyes were like chipped granite, cold and uncompromising. "I am General William Mitchell, Commander of the United States Army Forces Command. 20 minutes ago, I was notified that my 22-year-old son, Tobias Mitchell, was airlifted to this specific trauma center after a catastrophic collision on Interstate 90. My security detail has locked down the perimeter to ensure his absolute safety. Now, where is Margaret Sullivan?" Stanton's arrogant face immediately drained of all color. Toby, the boy bleeding out on the operating table, was the son of a 4-star general. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the sternum, but his massive, fragile ego quickly overrode his rising panic. This was his moment to secure his legacy. He stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "General Mitchell," Stanton said, adopting his most somber, authoritative physician's voice. "I am Dr. Oliver Stanton, the chief of trauma surgery. I was the lead surgeon who just operated on your son. It was a massive, catastrophic descending aortic tear. He flatlined on my table, sir, but I assure you through my swift intervention and expertise, I managed to cross-clamp the aorta, repair the torn vessel, and bring him back. Your son is perfectly stable." General Mitchell looked at Stanton, his weathered expression completely unreadable. "You saved my son, Dr. Stanton." "I did, sir." Stanton lied smoothly, a confident, patronizing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It was undoubtedly the most difficult procedure of my career, but I did not stop fighting for him. He is currently recovering comfortably in the intensive care unit." Mitchell stared at him in complete suffocating silence for 3 agonizing seconds. Then he slowly reached into his crisp uniform jacket and pulled out a rugged digital tablet. "That is fascinating, Dr. Stanton," Mitchell said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low decibel. "Because, according to Dr. Gregory Evans, your lead anesthesiologist, who just spoke to my medical liaison exactly 3 minutes ago, you froze. You panicked, dropped your instruments, and allowed my boy's heart to stop beating entirely." Stanton took a rapid step back, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "General, that is a gross misrepresentation of the facts. Evans is confused. The chaos of the operating room," the anesthesiologist stated. Mitchell interrupted, his voice now booming through the silent lobby like thunder. "That a scrub nurse shoved you out of the way, cracked my son's chest open, and blindly clamped his aorta with her bare hands, while you cowered against a tiled wall, screaming for hospital security. Is that true, Doctor?" Caldwell whipped his head toward Stanton, his eyes wide with utter horror. "Oliver, what on earth is he talking about?" Stanton was sweating profusely now, his polished demeanor shattering into a million pieces. "She assaulted me. She is a rogue, unstable scrub nurse who flagrantly violated every known hospital protocol. I fired her immediately. Harrison and I am having human resources press criminal charges as we speak." That woman should be in handcuffs. General Mitchell stepped directly into Stanton's personal space. The height difference was only a few inches, but Mitchell's sheer, terrifying presence made the arrogant surgeon look like a frightened, undisciplined child. "You fired her," Mitchell stated the words, slicing through the stagnant air like a razor blade. "Yes," Stanton stammered, clinging desperately to his rapidly evaporating false authority. "She is a profound danger to this hospital." Mitchell turned his broad back on the trembling surgeon with a look of pure disgust and looked directly at Caldwell. "Chief Caldwell, you have exactly 2 minutes to take me to Margaret Sullivan before I have my men dismantle this entire medical facility brick by brick to find her." Caldwell swallowed hard, terrified. She was sent to the basement locker rooms to pack her personal belongings, General. Please follow me." The procession moved swiftly through the sterile corridors. Mitchell, his 2 loyal aides, the heavily armed military police Caldwell, and a pale, violently shaking Stanton, descended into the subterranean level. Down in the desolate, flickering light of the locker room, Maggie Sullivan quietly zipped up her worn olive-drab canvas duffel bag. She was still wearing her plain gray undershirt, the jagged, ugly scar from a mortar fragment clearly visible on her left collarbone. She slung the heavy bag over her shoulder, mentally, preparing herself for the quiet, lonely bus ride back to her empty apartment. She had saved a young man's life today. That was all that truly mattered. She could easily find another job. She always did. She turned the corner to head toward the rear stairwell, only to find the hallway entirely blocked by men in black tactical gear. Maggie stopped instantly. Her dormant military training kicked in without a conscious thought. Her posture straightened, her feet slid shoulder-width apart, her pale blue eyes rapidly scanning the exits, assessing the potential threats. But then the rigid formation of armed men perfectly parted down the middle. General William Mitchell walked down the damp concrete corridor. Maggie's breath caught sharply in her throat. Her eyes widened slightly in pure shock. "General," Maggie whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system. Mitchell stopped exactly 3 feet in front of her. He looked at her civilian clothes, the heavy dark bags under her eyes, the way she instinctively held herself ready for a physical attack. The hardened general's jaw tightened visibly, and for a fleeting, unguarded moment, a profound sorrow flashed in his gray eyes. Stanton, misreading the situation entirely aggressively, pushed past Caldwell. "There she is," he pointed triumphantly. "General, arrest her. She assaulted an attending physician and deliberately broke the sterile field. Take her away." Mitchell ignored Stanton completely. He took a sharp, deliberate step forward, stood perfectly upright, and snapped his right hand to his brow in a razor-sharp, flawless military salute. "Captain Sullivan." General Mitchell commanded, his deep voice echoing loudly against the basement walls. Behind him, the 2 aides and all 12 heavily armed military police officers simultaneously snapped to attention, their hands slicing through the air to salute the quiet scrub nurse standing by the rusted metal lockers. The unified sound of their boots clicking together echoed like a gunshot. Dr. Caldwell gasped aloud. Stanton completely froze, his pointed finger slowly, pathetically dropping to his side, his brain violently short-circuiting as he stared in absolute bewilderment at the impossible scene unfolding before him. Maggie felt her hands tremble. It had been 4 years since anyone had addressed her by her proper rank. 4 years since the disastrous and bloody evacuation of the remote medical camp. She slowly raised her right hand to formally return the military salute to the imposing general. "At ease," she murmured softly. Mitchell dropped his hand. The dedicated men behind him followed him in perfect synchronization. The general took a deep and slightly unsteady breath. "It took my intelligence officers 3 solid years to track you down," Mitchell said softly. His stern face cracked just enough. "You disappeared from the military hospital the exact night before your medical discharge. You changed your legal name. You went completely off the grid." "I just wanted peace," Sir Maggie replied quietly. "I hated the loud noise so very much." "I know," Mitchell said kindly. "But tonight my command center got an encrypted ping. A highly specific surgical technique developed strictly within our Special Operations Command was successfully executed in a civilian hospital in Chicago on my own son. I instantly knew it was you. No civilian surgeon on Earth could have made that blind clamp under 30 seconds. Only you could perform that brave act in such absolute chaos." Stanton felt his weak knees shake. "Captain," he whispered in pure shock. His arrogant voice was reduced to a pathetic squeak. "Special Operations." Mitchell slowly turned his head to glare at the terrified surgeon. "Dr. Stanton, you are currently standing in the presence of Captain Margaret Sullivan of the United States Army Medical Command. During a massive enemy ambush, her forward operating base was completely overrun by armed rebel forces. Deadly shrapnel tore right through her shoulder that dark day. Despite her severe injuries, Captain Sullivan actively refused medical evacuation. She defended her medical tent alone with a simple pistol and then performed complex field surgery on 14 critically wounded soldiers while under direct enemy mortar fire. She saved every single one of them. One of those bleeding men was my younger brother," the proud general stated loud and clearly. The silence in the damp basement was absolute and deafening. The hospital administrator looked at Maggie with a mixture of profound awe and deep shame. Stanton looked completely hollowed out. He was a broken man, horrifyingly realizing he had just tried to destroy an American hero. Mitchell turned back to Maggie. He reached out to one of his dedicated aides, who respectfully handed him a small, dark, polished mahogany box. "You saved my brother in the bloody dirt of Afghanistan," Mitchell said, his powerful voice thickening with rare emotion. "And today you miraculously saved my son in this hospital. I am profoundly in debt to you for the rest of my natural life. But I am not just here as a grateful father today. I am here formally today on behalf of the President of the United States of America." Mitchell carefully opened the box. Resting perfectly on a bed of dark blue velvet was a bronze star suspended from a silk ribbon, the absolute highest military decoration. Stanton physically staggered backward. He heavily braced his trembling hand against the concrete wall to keep from collapsing onto the floor. He had yelled at her. He had insulted her intelligence. He had fired her in a fit of pure blind rage. Captain Sullivan Mitchell said loudly as he read from a folded parchment, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty."